A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk. Let's Talk is a program sponsored by the South Leeward Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. A program sponsored to be able to come your way and to share. We discuss issues. That impact the church and the wider community. Issues ranging from creationism to health issues. We talk about women in ministry. We talk about artificial intelligence. We talk about reproductive technologies. We discuss any issue that may have relevance for Christians' life and the church in general. This afternoon, we are going to be discussing what I consider to be a very important element. We have been, for the last few weeks, talking about ministering in a changing world, some of the challenges of the modern era, of the pluralistic society that we live in, some of the challenges that bring to ministry. And today we're going to be talking about community outreach. How do we minister to our community members? Before I introduce our guests, we'd like to invite you to have a word of prayer with us, shall we? Father, be with us as we go into today's Let's Talk session. We ask that you will guide in the discussion, that you will take full control and have your own way. May this discussion prove meaningful to those who listen. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen.
So friends, as I indicated, we are talking today we are continuing this series. We are almost wrapping up this series now, Ministering in a Changing World. And I am almost tempted to share with you some exciting things coming up in the future, but let's give our attention to today's discussion. We're talking about ministering in a changing world, and we are dealing specifically with community outreach, this whole concept of the ministry of compassion. With us this afternoon to discuss this is the newly appointed Community Services Director for the South Leeward Conference. I am delighted to introduce to us, first time on Let's Talk, in fact, Pastor Frederick Alfred. Pastor Frederick Alfred, as I indicated, is the newly appointed Community Service Director. He deals with community services. He also is responsible for possibility ministries, that some of you who may be wondering what that is, that he may tell you about it, but it has to do with those who are physically challenged, and he deals with the whole matter of, I think, prison ministry likewise. We are delighted to have Pastor Alfred with us this afternoon. I would like to just let you know that Pastor Frederick Alfred hails from the island of Dominica. I was in his territory just a few weeks ago. He left the land of 365 rivers to come and live in the land of 365 beaches. Pastor Alfred responded to the call to surrender his life to Jesus back in 1994. In fact, I remember that evangelistic campaign when Pastor Alfred responded to the call. God moves in mysterious ways. He was sitting on a stone outside the tent when the evangelist said, "There's a young man sitting behind a stone. You need to surrender to Jesus." The evangelist didn't see him, didn't know he was there, but that's how the Spirit moves. And he responded to God's call. He eventually served in his local congregation, Maranatha Seventh Adventist Church in Antigua, and became first elder, responded to the call to serve Jesus as Lord and Savior, went off to Northern Caribbean University, graduated, and has been serving as a pastor, giving outstanding service for a number of years. and he was recently elected as the Community Service Director. We're delighted to have you with us this afternoon, Pastor Alfred. Good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk.
Good afternoon, Dr. Greene, and pleasant good afternoon to everybody. It's really an honor to be here. I thought to myself some time ago, after watching the Let's Talk program for the past weeks and months, and I was saying to myself, one day, I believe I may just go on Let's Talk.
Well, you're here now. You're here now.
And I'm really happy to be here to share, to discuss this very important topic with us today. I believe God has his hand in this operation, and I think we are in for a very great and meaningful discussion today. As a matter of fact, I can tell you further that I have invited my entire family, and I've invited all my leaders and so on from the community services ministry all over the conference. I've invited the possibility leaders, the prison ministry leaders, and I believe they are all, not all there, but most of them might be on hand listening at the time to our very important discussion today. So I'm very happy and delighted to be here, Dr. Greene.
We're delighted to have you, Pastor Alfred. 1 hour goes by very quickly, so we're going to jump right into the discussion. I want to say that because we're talking about ministry in a changing world, so many things are changing. Just yesterday, in fact, I listened to a news item, and the announcer said that yesterday marked the 4th consecutive day when the world temperature hit record levels. So for all the years that they have been measuring world temperature, for the last 4 days, it has never been higher. We live in changing times,
Yes.
and as an indication that Jesus is coming soon. But amidst all of the changes, one thing seems to remain constant, Pastor Alfred, and that is those who are less fortunate, those who have a need for humanitarian assistance. And this afternoon, we are talking about community outreach. The Seventh Adventist Church is very strong in the area of community outreach. I want to ask you, the ultimate aim of the church is to save people for the kingdom. Some say that our concern should just be to focus on the preaching of the gospel of Jesus and not worry about helping less fortunate, because after all, we are a church. We're not some kind of public service agency. Isn't doing community outreach essentially preaching the gospel?
Yes, Doctor, you're so right. When you think about the gospel to begin, the very nature of the gospel demands that we have to reach humanity at where humanity is at their level. And so we understand too that the purpose of the gospel is that we restore mankind to the level at which he was. You recall that at creation, man was created physically, emotionally, spiritually perfect. But sin has marred our visage. And so as a result of that, the perfection that man was created in is now well nigh gone. And the purpose of the gospel, in essence, is to reach man at his level. So that, Jesus Christ himself has shown us exactly, one second. I just want to get this thing organized. So Christ himself has shown us exactly what it means to be incarnational. When Jesus came down to earth, you remember he came with the one mission, one purpose, and that was to restore man to God's original image. The very fact that he went on Calvary's cross and he suffered, and even before he went on Calvary, we recall in Luke chapter 4 that he said that he explained what his actual mission statement is. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor." So Christ apparently had a particular mission for the poor He had a particular concern for those who were marginalized, and he had a concern for social justice. And so it's important for us to recognize today that even in this changing world, one thing remains constant. This outreach arm of the gospel is very critical. We really cannot negate the fact that it's important. As a matter of fact, there was one man, I think his name is Monte Salim. He mentioned this, which I will read to us right now. He says that, that's Monte Salim, he said that the demonstration of compassion for disadvantaged and downtrodden are tangible evidences of the Holy Spirit's presence. They provide a look and feel of Christ's message, just as surely as preaching and teaching and various print and electronic media can provide the content. So what he's in fact saying, Doug, is the fact that, you know, the outreach arm, the incarnation, the flesh and blood arm, when we reached out to the poor like Jesus did, the gospel puts on flesh and blood, essentially.
Yeah, I know Monty. I had the privilege of sitting in a class at Andrews University. Yeah, and one thing I can tell you is that in his ministerial life, he's of course now retired, but in his ministerial life, he was very involved in community services. You know, he made it a point to get involved. He knew the sheriff, he knew the local council members. He was right there involved in the whole operation of community. And I think the point of what he was saying there is so important, because, you know, when we read the Bible, and I often say to people, you know, salvation is not just salvation from sin, salvation from all kinds of things that impact us, because sin is far-reaching, and Jesus came to make things better for us, and that's the general idea. But let's move on a little bit, Pastor. Why is this ministry of compassion so important in today's context? In today's context, we have, I mentioned earlier that we are living in a changing world. People have become more sophisticated. Once upon a time, we didn't know things like cell phones and motor vehicles and the like, but we have advanced technologically. Why is the ministry of compassion still so necessary today?
Very good question. You know, we all agree, Doc, that we live in a society that is riddled with sins of poverty on a global and regional and even local level. We are plagued with pandemics. We had COVID just 2 years ago. We have disasters booming, and the entire world is actually in complete ruin. And we often wonder, when is it all going to end? You know, I was reading some paper yesterday, a report of the world economic situation. It said that 30% of poor persons are living in low-income housing, and 70% are residing in middle-income housing, which says to us that quite a bit of persons are living just above or below the poverty line. And that's instructive. And when you weigh that against the fact that economic dollar is getting less and less, losing its power, we wonder, you know, what this is all about. So essentially, this compassionate ministry is the hallmark of Jesus's ministry. You know, in John chapter 7, verse 18, he said that he is going to send us out into the world like his Father sent him into the world. And so we have a responsibility to share the right arm of the gospel through a flesh and blood ministry. Now, Matthew 28 is our mandate. It says to make disciples of all men, to baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. To make disciples, we must go to the ends of the earth, not so? And establish a ministry of presence with every nation, every tribe, every people, every language. And so we recognize today that this society needs somebody some persons to reach out in a very tangible and flesh and blood way. This is what we have, this is what we are, as what we do as community services leaders in the churches, as Adventists that we are called to do.
Now, Pastor, thanks so much. Some persons think of community services as providing, should I say, food baskets and financial aid. I want to say that is community outreach, but that is just, in my opinion, a limited aspect of community outreach. So I believe you would agree with me that community outreach is much more than giving out a food hamper here and there. So while these are aspects of community services, it's a lot more expansive than this. Can you share with us some of the facets of community services?
It's amazing you will ask this question, because I had a meeting with all my ACS leaders in Antigua about a week and a half ago. And we were discussing the result of the convention that happened at Liberta. And, they have this notion that, once we have given out over 1,000 packages, because the report said to be given over 1,000 packages. So I had to tell them, that's only one aspect of it. Because when you look, Doc, at the Hebrew model of ministry, we talk about the social aspect, we talk about the mental aspect, we talk about the physical aspect, we talk about the intellectual, the spiritual aspect. It's the whole man. We're looking to restore the whole person, so that, in essence, we are looking at restoring the whole person essentially. Ellen Jordan makes this point. She says, Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching people. She said the Lord mingled. He mingled with people as one who desired their good. He showed sympathy for them. He ministered to their needs. And then, Dr. Greene, he won their confidence. Then he bade them to follow him. So that we're talking about socializing. We have to provide the networking. We have to mingle with the people, meet them where they are, identify with their issues, with their needs, with their felt needs. Then we sympathize with them. We understand their ministry, where they're coming from, their background, etc. We serve them, because ministry is essentially service. And then we offer salvation. Can you imagine, Dr. Greene, having to preach the gospel to a man who is hungry? He wouldn't listen to you. His first need is for food. So we have to begin to meet the temporal needs first before we're able to meet the man's spiritual need. I remember, for example, years ago, when I was at a church in Antigua, and the floods came. There was a rain on end in Antigua, and one of the members' church houses was flooded. She lost every single thing she lost. And so the church decided that, they had to meet that need, because her immediate need was for shelter, was for comfort, was for food. And even though we should have liked to have a prayer, we prayed for her and everything, but her immediate need was for food. So the point I'm making is that, we have to meet people at the level of the need before we're able to, as entering wedge, to meeting the spiritual need, which is ultimately salvation.
So Pastor, some persons need food, others may need financial assistance.
Correct.
Some persons need may be psychological. You know, they may be having emotional issues.
Mhm.
I'm hearing you talking about networking. I'm hearing you talking about responding to the needs of others. And initially, earlier, when I asked about the various facets, you know, I wanted to highlight the fact that a community services ministry that is established doesn't just give out food hampers, but that we are responding to the needs, whatever they may be. Some persons may have the need to develop skills so that they can become more entrepreneurial. Other persons may want assistance with their children's homework from school. A church may decide, you know, we're going to establish a homework club to assist children after school. You may have a society where a number of people, young people in the society, seem not to have any ambition, and you may want to create a community group for them to guide them, to counsel them, etc. And I'm thinking that there's so many different aspects of community services, moving away from the traditional thing where we go out and give out some food hampers. I don't want to downplay the food hamper, but you know, I hear that so often that sometimes I wonder, can people think of other things that community services can do?
You're so correct, because you know, and the concept is that and that's why it's important to combine, for example, community services with the ADRA and the prison ministries and the possibility ministries, because the concept is that what you really want to do is to reach out to the whole person. And because there are different facets, because persons need vary, as you have mentioned, the community services has to be wide enough to be able to meet whatever the need is. And so there's sometimes, for example, in the community, you may have persons who may not be as tech savvy. And so what that would mean that that would need, therefore, a networking between the youth ministry, because the young persons are very tech savvy. And so you have a partnership between the community services persons and the youth. They consult. So the community services person will teach the young persons how to crochet, how to knit, how to cook veggie meals, while the young person will teach the community services person how to be tech savvy, how to be with the computer. Another area we're talking about skills, how to do plumbing, how to change a tire, you know, those kind of things, those skills areas that are so necessary for everyday existence. So it's as broad as you could have it. And the good thing about it, Doc, is that in the church, once you carry out a needs assessment, then you're able to see, determine what the needs are, what the resource potential is, and then you're able to network with whatever ministry, especially because I think nowadays, and you're so correct, that we have this idea that it's for old people, you know, the old darker society, and many young persons don't like the green color and so on and so on.
Well,
you know?
it's interesting that you are saying that, because I was sitting here thinking, you know, about when I was a young Seventh Adventist, you know, because I recall a group of ladies, mostly old, as you mentioned, you know, who would do the knitting and the crocheting and that kind of thing. And we call them Dorcas. And some persons seem to still have the concept that community services is Dorcas. I remember as a young pastor, I was explaining to my church that what we have, you know, if the old folks want to sit and knit and sew, I don't have a challenge with that, but community services is beyond that. The changing of the concept that community services is for a group of old ladies in the church who maybe are retired and have nothing else to do, so they spend their time knitting and crocheting and that kind of thing. How important is that we have a different concept to what community services is, and especially because we I like to think that community services is our greatest opportunity for meaningful ministry in our societies. So you are the community service director. How important it is for people to change that concept that community services is just dollars?
It's a critical question, very important question to consider. Because first, we have to understand that the need has no age boundaries. Young persons do have need. They have psychological need. They may have a spiritual and a social need, as well as old people. And what I plan to do is, as far as possible, in terms of networking with the youth ministry, for example, so that in strategizing for both ministries, we can have a situation where the old and the young will partner together. So we bridge the gap, per se, when it comes to ministry. An example of this came very, very powerfully to me on the very first Sabbath of Youth Week, for example, Doc. What we did in the community of Safety Farm, the community services leaders and youth ministry came together, and we gave out 200 packages in the community. And that to my mind was very instructive, because it says to me, what it says to me, it is the genesis of a partnership that can happen to effect ministry. Because what would happen is that while you have the age-related persons ministering to the age group. So when you have the older folks, the more matured persons ministering to the age group, as well as the young persons. And already, I could tell you my entire family, my daughters who were young adults, they've said to me, Daddy, we're going to get the uniform very soon.
It's interesting, Pastor, because I believe that people genuinely want to make a difference. I think the important thing is that the ministry ought to be relevant. And, if we can see Christianity, Seventh-Adventism, as a religion, a movement that is impacting for good, so that people who get involved, at whatever age they may be, would understand that a part of my Christian responsibility is to demonstrate practical godliness. I think that is so important. Yes.
That's critical. As a matter of fact, the kind of commitment that the older folks tend to demonstrate, that could inspire the younger people to ministry as well. So that when we have a partnership of both persons working together, I believe it could be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, certainly. Before we look to see what questions people may be asking, when there is a humanitarian need, we do not distinguish between a church member and a non-member. There are those who think that we should make a distinction, and we should always seek to help the Seventh Adventists first, because we are Seventh Adventists. But, community services, and especially ADRA, you mentioned that in a little bit, and I'm going to ask you about that in a little while. But we think that people in need are people in need, and we have to see colors. There are those who feel strongly that, you should help the members of the church first, and if anything is left, then you help others. Now, I do want to say that the members of the church would be closer to us, and they're part of the household of faith, and we would respond accordingly. But should we really discriminate?
It's a very important question that you asked, Doc. My philosophy is that, we have an equal responsibility to the household of faith, like we do for those outside. We have a ministry to both. And if you think about commission, it says to go into all the world. We have our Jerusalem, we have our Samaria, and so on, and so on, and so on. So all the different areas are equally important. I think what the difference is, it's a matter of need and priority. It's a matter of assessing what the needs are. And if there is a need that's of grave of gravity, then we would seek to meet that need first. So there are times when it may appear that we tend to be partial, but I believe what normally happens, what should happen, is that we do an assessment first to determine the extent of the need, the priority level. We have to look at the resource potential that we have, because there are some churches that have more resource potential than other churches. And so we, having done these things, then we determine who will be the recipient of the need of the help.
You know, I think every local congregation should have some kind of system for ministering to their members. I don't want to give the impression that the church is a I want to choose my words carefully here, because the church as an institution exists for the preaching of the gospel, but as I mentioned, we have to be practical in our approach to it likewise. But I think in the local congregation, there should be some kind of system for understanding and ministering to those people. But if you have a disaster, let's say there's a hurricane, you don't go out and say, all the Adventists will get their roofs blown off, come and we're going to help you, but the others can't come. That's not how the church functions. And I think some persons, I have been in situations where some members tend to push back on that when we are doing humanitarian help. Where if there are two persons whose roofs are off, I think it would make sense that we try to help both equally and not say, well, this one's Adventist, I'm going to help her, and the other one is not, I'm not going to help him.
So true. And you know, the thing is too that we have to remember that God has given everybody a responsibility, a particular gift. When it comes to things like sickness and death and disaster and so on, you know, we cannot not reach out to our hands and assist, you know, when it comes to these kind of things. But you know, I always say to Doc that if you give a man a fish today, he's going to come back on another fish tomorrow. But if you teach the man how to fish, then the man would be more independent and so on. So the point I'm making is that we have a responsibility as well. There are times, of course, when things do happen, disasters do happen, and maybe beyond your ability to assist or to reach out to your own personal need. But at the same time, we got to remember that we have to be good stewards of what God has given to us. That's also a critical part, because you have some members sometimes who come and request for things when, you know, and so it might not be a need, but a want, you know. So we have to be always mindful that God expects us to be good stewards of the gifts and the resources he has given to us as well. So we too have a personal responsibility. Of course, you know, I remember some time ago when there had some hurricane and part of my roof got blown off. You know, of course, you know, you have insurance and so on. But at the same time, you know, I also have responsibility to ensure that there is something put aside in case those kind of things happen. That's the point I'm making.
Well, I'm thinking here, Pastor, that you know, individuals who are members of the church, I want to say that it is a privilege to be a Seventh Adventist. It provides so many opportunities for persons to learn proper financial management. The stewardship department organizes some very instructive courses in terms of family finance, along with family life department. And you mentioned just now teaching a man to fish, so that if we are providing not just handouts, so to speak, but we are putting individuals in positions where they can improve themselves. But I'm thinking that we shouldn't just have these things for the church alone. I am seeing that community services, you mentioned a needs assessment. Sometimes you go in the community, and if you don't carry the right needs assessment survey, because if the survey is prepared and you give people 5 choices, they're going to choose one, but it's not necessarily the most significant thing that the community needs. So we do have to have a very studied approach to how we do these kinds of surveys, I'm thinking. But I am seeing that it's an opportunity for us to not just teach our members how to fish, but also teach people in the community. And, you know, this teaching ministry, if we can reach out to community members in a loving, caring way, without any strings attached, Pastor.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to comment on this, right? Because I had somebody say to me the other day, you know, somebody appealed for assistance, and somebody responded by saying, you know, all they want, the church is going to help them, and then you're not going to see them again. So what if the church helps the person and the person doesn't stick around? Is that an indication that we shouldn't help them again?
No, as a matter of fact, it happened to me many times before. There are persons who would have come and asked for assistance and from the church board and everything from the church, and after we didn't see them. But the fact is that the church has met a need, because that's what the church is there for. We are there. We are designed. We call out of darkness into God's marvelous light to assist and to draw men. Part of the gospel, as I said before, is reaching out to the humanitarian side. If that is the specific temporal need, the felt need, then we have a responsibility as a church to reach out and meet that need first. And we shouldn't worry and bother about if the person doesn't come back. You know, so we have a responsibility. Once we have met that need under God, God knows exactly that we are responding to a need as He has commanded us to. Because you recall, I mentioned earlier that Jesus, His mission's mandate is enshrined in Luke chapter 4, verses 17 to 19, when He came to the place and He said, "The Spirit of God is upon me, because He has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, to set those who are captive, free, etc., etc., etc." And this is what community services, and I dare say, even the prison ministries, the possibility ministries, and the other ministries is all about. I tend to see, Doc, a connection between all of the 4. I tend not to separate them, because I believe that there is a one aim of all ministry, and that aim is the restoration of man, of God, of the image of God in man.
I think sometimes when we have names, you know, ministries, so you talk about community services, you talk about youth ministry, you talk about women's ministry, sometimes we forget that they are all interrelated.
That's correct.
And I want to give an example. There may be hurting women in the community, women who may be suffering from abuse and the like. And community services and women's ministries can partner to do a seminar on responding to abuse. You know, that to me would be a very impacting thing for individuals who are in that particular situation. And so we shouldn't say, well, I don't want to be involved in this ministry because I'm involved in another one. But the collaboration, the partnership, I think, is so very important. You know. Now, Pastor, time moves by so quickly. I do want to ask you this question. The church should and does provide assistance. But I believe it is important that people understand that the church is not a financial institution. You know, from where I sit, we get so many requests, and I do understand and appreciate the fact that when people are in need, they turn to the church for assistance, and that is in order. It is important, however, to appreciate the fact that the church is not a financial institution. It does not have an endless supply of financial resources. the question is, how do you respond to those who believe that the church must respond to their every need? Some persons even determine they don't want to have anything to do with the church because they got sick and they asked the church to assist and the church didn't give them enough. How do you respond to those who are of that mindset?
Well, first of all, I think it goes back to education. Many persons have a wrong concept of what the church is all about. And I think very early, part of the responsibility of the leadership of the church is to ensure that we teach the membership, the new conference example, what we church is all about. Because some members believe that the church must pay their bills when they miss a month of the house rent, the church must come and assist them, help with the house rent, etc., etc. I believe that the first thing is education, and that's so important, that members know what the church is responsible for. The whole aspect of tithe and offerings, and what happened to the tithe, what happened to the offerings, what is left in the church. So at times when we have business meetings, etc., it's a very good opportunity to explain to the membership exactly how the financial aspect of the church functions.
I think you are so correct. Education is important. And I do believe that the Ministry of Compassion goes beyond being able to give something tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the intangibles are just as important, just as significant. Sometimes, if there's a death in the family, a person can, go by, just their presence can make a big difference. Mm-hmm. And they may not be given something physically, but their presence says so much. And that is important. And, I would that the church would be able to provide assistance to all who needs. But I think it is also important that, as you mentioned, we educate the church members to understand, that if you miss your rent, there is no obligation on the church to pay that rent for you. Some persons are of the opinion that because I return tithes, the church should step in. And I think it's important to make a distinction there. The tithe does not belong to the local church. I mean, it's God's tithe, but we are not at liberty to use it how we want. And that's important. Maybe another time we can have that discussion.
Yeah, that's critical.
Yeah, but for now, earlier, I mentioned that the church does not have endless financial resources. We understand that ministering to the needs of the community is also everybody's business. Mm-hmm. And when I say everybody, I'm saying whether an individual is a member of the church or not, ministering to the community is everybody's business. So we're open to partnership in ministry. I believe when you started earlier in one of your first comments, you mentioned partnerships, which is a word I like, but some people don't like. I have to say that up front. There are those people who believe that if you're Seventh Adventist, you should not join hands with somebody else to do something, even if it's humanitarian. But again, I'm underscoring the fact that community outreach is everybody's business.
Yeah.
Can you speak to, let's say, something that we encourage people to get, non-Seventh Adventists to get involved in community outreach? We have a campaign annually we call the In Gathering campaign. Yeah. And can you speak to that? How does that help non-members to join us in providing aid to the community?
Thank you so much. That's an excellent question, Doc. The In Gathering initiative, which began in 1908 in North America and spread through the entire conference in 1920, it has a particular objective. First of all, to involve members, every member as active participants in the annual In Gathering campaign. Secondly, what it does, it gives us an opportunity to visit the homes and the business persons and to share the love and hope of Christ it also creates an opportunity, Doc, for the community, the non-Seventh Adventists, to partner with us in a very worthwhile humanitarian initiative, where when we present our specific plans and projects which would benefit the community, whatever particular is, whether to build a home for the aged, whether to build a community center, as the case might be, we invite the public to give a monetary contribution towards that project. And then when it comes to the church, to the conference, what happens is that the 90% of the overflow, where every church would have been given a super goal, a goal and a super goal, if this church would have exceeded their goal, they receive 90% of the overflow. And the percentage comes to for education, 30% for education, 30% for disaster, and for welfare. So that at the end of it, at the end of the period, what happens, the community, the church now has a responsibility to make good that promise it has made, to share and to give back to the community in whatever project that would have been essential for its development. So that every year between January and up to maybe March, April, we have this initiative, which is a very powerful initiative. And it's an opportunity for every non-Seventh Adventist, as well as every Seventh Adventist, to share and to partner in this very worthwhile and powerful venture. To my mind, I can't think of any more powerful initiative that has such a reach like the Gathering program does.
So, Pastor, there are a couple of things I want to ask you on that one. Before that, however, I just want to apologize to many of our viewers. It appears that there is an issue with the chat. Some persons who are not subscribers seem not to be able to post in the chat at this time. So I want to apologize for that. We will try to rectify it if we are able to in time. But in the meantime, you mentioned that this ingathering campaign provides an opportunity for us to invite others to join us, partnering with us. I want to ask you to emphasize the partnership aspect. Is anything wrong with partnering with non-Adventists in doing humanitarian outreach?
There is nothing wrong with it. As a matter of fact, in every community, there are some community action groups, or most communities. We have business places, and they're business persons who, what they do, they have an interest as well in the welfare of the community, because they serve the community. And having been called by God for the very purpose of restoring humanity to God's original image, we also have a greater responsibility, to my mind, because we are called by God. And so whatever it takes, partnering with a non-SDA is a very powerful initiative, because what it does, it brings the human resource potential we have more resource potential to work with, and we have a greater reach. For example, during Gathering, we normally write letters to those business places, like Veg and so on, these places where that are notable for having the money, the rich, and we partner with them, and in so doing, we are better able, therefore, to reach as many persons as possible. The more human resource we have, the more monies we have, is the more we're able to do.
So the Gathering funds that we collect from individuals in the community are to be used in community outreach.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think it is important, if a church does very well in Gathering, the community should see how the church is using some of those funds to make a difference in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's so true.
Yeah. Now, so that our time doesn't expire before you touch this, we have an international agency called ADRA. Can you explain what ADRA means and what it does?
ADRA, very powerful question. ADRA is called the Adventist Development Relief Agency. It's an independent humanitarian agency developed by the Seventh Adventist Church with the specific purpose of individual and community development and disaster response. The directive is an outgrowth, Doc, of a deeply held belief that human life is infinitely valuable. Now, ADRA has a purpose. The purpose of ADRA is to serve humanity so all may live as God intended us to do. Our motto is justice, compassion, and love. In fact, ADRA is a humanitarian arm of the church. It's part of the 20 million strong Adventist community with hundreds of thousands of churches globally and the world's largest integrated healthcare and education network. ADRA delivers relief and development assistance to individuals in more than 107 countries globally, regardless of their ethnicity, the political affiliation, the gender, or religious association. So far, Doc, I could say that that ADRA has served 25.3 million people worldwide. So far, I could say it has had about 1.6 million total projects. So ADRA is a very powerful, just like the Ingathering is, ADRA is a very powerful human resource agency.
So, from the perspective of a listener who may not understand the Seventh Adventist Church, is it something similar to Red Cross?
It's around the same agency because, as a matter of fact, ADRA normally partners with Red Cross. So when there is a disaster, like a hurricane, a flood, and so on, ADRA comes in the picture. And so, like what we do, there is an emergency plan that normally comes with ADRA. We have to understand that it is divided into 4 phases. There is a preparation phase. There is the proactive phase. There's also the response and relief phase. But at this point, we really can't wait until something happens for us to say we're going to help somebody. So essentially, just like Red Cross does, I believe they operate on the same kind of basis where there is the time of preparation and so on. And so we partner with them as well. So it's essentially the same concept.
When I listen to the news, and I hear of disasters taking place in Turkey and in other places, you often hear that humanitarian relief agencies are there on the ground. I believe that most times ADRA is one of them. I mean, if you look at our local news, you would see those reports. We sometimes don't get highlighted as often as maybe we should in the public media, but ADRA is pretty much there. However, I notice it's Adventist development. The development comes before the response relief element. Why is that important?
Well, of course, development speaks of planning. It speaks of preparedness, and it speaks of response. Like I said before, there is something called the emergency management cycle, which describes a sequence of phases that encompass the major aspects of emergency management. So that when it speaks to development, we're talking of prevention. We really can't. One of the major things about response is that we have to be focused on prevention. Then we're talking about preparedness, the development of an emergency plan before the actual thing happens. Then we talk about response and recovery. So the whole purpose of ADRA begins with preparedness and prevention. And that's where, to my mind, development comes in there.
I think, Pastor, just to add a perspective, sometimes the biggest disasters are not natural disasters. Sometimes the biggest disasters in the world are things like poverty and, self-inflicted disasters. When a child refuses to learn in school, that's a disaster in the making. And one of the things that ADRA does, and not because I want to focus on what you mentioned there about the prevention. I think you mentioned prevention. I noticed that ADRA does a lot of not just response work, not just responding to disasters, but work in the area of they do things like going into a community and digging wells so that people can get fresh water supply. Build churches,
healthcare,
things that can serve the entire community. Agricultural projects. I visited Suriname, and ADRA was doing a number of projects in some of the communities in the interior regions, helping them to farm, sustainable farming, etc. And you mentioned prevention, and I'm seeing that as prevention in the sense of putting them in a position where they will not end up in dire poverty, because you're meeting them, you're responding to their needs, and you are helping them out of certain situations. Our time is going quickly. Somebody is asking a question here. In fact, there were a few questions. I know that there were some issues with the chat, and we kind of overlooked. But since there is a question about funding of ADRA, but before that, to be fair with those who were on before, earlier somebody was asking, shouldn't the church be involved in the proper management of existing resources? Resources in terms of, I did mention earlier that we do not have a limitless supply of resources, and this person is asking, shouldn't the church be, what was the question again? Let me just check it there. Shouldn't the church be involved in the proper management of existing resources?
Of course, the church is part and parcel of the process. We have in the local church, for example, to begin there, we have a system, a financial system. We have treasurers, we have leaders on the board, etc. We have normal regular reports, and those are things put in place to manage the financial resources of the church. And when it comes to ADRA, for example, ADRA, we have moved in the conference doc, I believe you can mention it, that we now have our license, so we are able then to solicit funding and manage the funding from various organizations that contribute to us as well. So of course, part of the process is the actual management of the resource that we have.
Again, in the interest of time, Pastor, because our time is just about expired, in terms of ADRA funding, I think it is important also to emphasize that ADRA is a not-for-profit agency.
Correct.
We don't have time to go into all of the details right now, so I just want to just share something quickly, because when compared to many of the other agencies, welfare disaster agencies, if you look at their books, you would notice that what ADRA does is that the majority of the funding that it gets, in many of these other agencies, a significant portion of the funding is used in administration. It's the opposite in ADRA. You give ADRA $50, it's going to use $49 for humanitarian work, etc. Of course, there is administration and there has to be some kind of overhead costs, but ADRA has a system where they pump all the money into what it is given for. And I think it's important to mention that. But as a not-for-profit agency, it gets public funding, so if there's a disaster, ADRA is going to appeal to individuals, businesses, corporations, agencies, and so on, to provide assistance so that it can help. And it goes on the on and does its thing. We don't have time to go into all of the details because I noticed that our time has expired, Pastor. I wanted, if we can squeeze this in very quickly, because I know that in your local congregation, the last congregation you pastored, before you became the community service director, that you had a pretty active community service center in your church.
Yes.
And, you know, I think a desire for me as president, a desire for every local congregation is to see an active community service center. So could you just mention something about that and how it functioned and the impact that it has on the society there?
Very important question. Now, we at Villa, like I said, we had a very active community service center here. Every Tuesday, the leaders would meet and they would do the culinary arts, cooking and so on, and people would come on Tuesday mornings from like 11 o'clock until 1 o'clock, and they would get some clothes, and they would get a word, a prayer, and they would also get some food. And that has happened over a period of time. So what we do ever so often, we have a database. When the persons come, we have a database, and because we are geared towards the restoration of the whole person, we decide that at certain points in time of every first Sabbath, those are the very same persons we will target on the first Sabbath for extra visitation and Bible study. So they are followed up with, and not only are they given the clothes and the food and that's it, but we look at the particular need. There's one time as well that there was a lady, a family, who came, and the family, and when we went and looked at where they lived in a very decrepit situation. And so we decided that we would actually put together and actually refurbish the house, you know. So out of the ministry, we're able to broaden the scope and so on, look at persons, not only the felt need for food and for clothing, but we broaden it. We had a plan as well that we would have a doctor come in every Tuesday as well. So while the persons come for the clothing and the food, they get to get their blood pressure checked and their heart checked and so on and so on and so forth with the presence of a doctor or nurse. And so that has been very valuable. And so I think my plan as community service leader is to establish as far as possible that concept in all the churches in the Southfield Conference. That would take different steps though. We have to establish a team of persons. We got to do the assessment in the community. We got to ensure we have the persons with the skills necessary. We have to develop a community assessment tool. We have to do a walkthrough to the community and look at the demographics of the community, et cetera, et cetera. And those are the things we plan to do because the idea is that at every church, as far as possible, in the Southfield Conference, we want to establish a community services center.
Well, Pastor Alfred, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I'm looking forward excitedly when every church will have that kind of center, you know, and as you mentioned there at Villa, where folks can come to the church on Tuesday mornings, knowing that they are going to be able to find clothing, they're going to be able to find food, they're going to be able to find counseling, etc. That is what we call practical ministry. And so thank you so much to all of our viewers. It was a delight sharing with you today. We're going to be back next week with another very intriguing discussion. May God bless you. May He keep you faithful. Until next week, when we have another edition of Let's Talk.
Amen.